I run a crowdfunding platform called Trillion Fund. Trillion Fund raises asset-backed loans for infrastructure. We focus on social and environmental projects, which do what we say a triple bottom line return. So yes, it's about profit, but usually there's a benefit to people and environment at the same time. And I founded the Crowdfunding Association nearly 3 years ago now. So when crowdfunding was born, it was born in the creative industry. These were people making films and going on tour. Marillion was the big UK band that first crowdfunded because the record company said, there's no way we're giving you guys any money. You're not very trustworthy. You drink too much, take too many drugs, and you're not a good credit risk. The fans, however, felt quite differently. And really, this is where it came from. Now, because people are putting their money in because they want the project to happen, because they want the new watch, because they want to help the single mothers in Costa Rica, they're not expecting their money back. It is not deemed a financial service at all. So it's outside regulation and there's no hint of it coming in. So it's really not something that you do as an investment or a loan to make money. It's a different way of accessing products and services, and that's on the far left-hand side. The whole thing was born because of the funding gap. If this was pre-2008, I don't think any of us would be here doing it. I did the Oxford Union debate with Anthony Jenkins just before he vacated his position as CEO of Barclays. And he maintained there wasn't a funding gap, and I maintain there is a funding gap. And this is what creates demand. If it wasn't the case that businesses needed to raise money quickly, cost effectively, and with some ease, we wouldn't be here in the first place. So that's the demand. Huge support for competition. Again, post-banking crisis, because George Osborne is of the view that the centre of fintech should be in the UK, because the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards talks about financial stability requiring more diversity, and in our language, we can't have 5 banks that are too big to fail and too big to jail. There's a huge drive for innovation coming through, and that creates an extraordinary environment that we have here today. We are slightly burnt by 2008. We talk about retail investors in particular. There's been a lot of misselling stories. They really don't feel a high level of trust in the banks. It is the case that there is some dissatisfaction there. And last year, 2.6 million bank accounts were opened outside the Big Five. Now, we're not talking about beating banks. The banks aren't going to go away. But we are seeing that people are starting to spread their money out across different areas. The regulation is so fundamental, and it's probably too boring to talk about this morning, but we have the most open regulation anywhere in the world. We leapfrogged the States. I went over and saw Woody and Jason, who had the Jobs Act, found out what they were doing right, brought it back here, and because we collaborated as an industry, we moved really, really quickly. So anyone can now invest up to 10% of their net investable assets directly into businesses and people across the UK. It's a fundamental shift, because we used to have a situation where you had to understand the risk you were taking and demonstrate that you could bear the loss. And the fundamental shift with the FCA is, first of all, they have effective competition in the remit, so they do care about competition in the market a bit, as well as consumer protection. But it's also the case that we've got a balance between consumer protection and consumer opportunity, and they're looking for ways to open up the market and not stop people doing something on the basis of how much money they have. The campaign was called Wealth is Not a Skill Set. It may not be the case that just because you're rich you know what you're doing, and just because you're poor you don't. Huge number of people deciding for themselves where to put their money. Deloitte scale it at 5.5, I think it's many more. But when people are deciding what to do for their money because they can't afford advice, we think this is simple and transparent and direct, and they might just choose to put their money into real things. This is the fundamental game changer. The Innovative Finance ISA comes out in April next year. We know that Hargreaves Lansdown are flat out having poached some people from some other credible platforms, risk teams, and this is the addressable market. So that's £473 billion in ISAs today, and the third ISA coming out in just over 6 months' time. And it says 2 things. First of all, it says businesses, you can now look at the net return, and that might take 50 blips off your cost of borrowing. Lenders, you don't have to pay tax on your returns. Your net returns just went up. But more importantly, UK, this is a mainstream thing to do with your money. You can put your ISA into debt-based crowdfunding, and it's a huge signal that the industry is coming of age. Now, not all crowdfunding is going in an ISA. Everybody calm down, nobody panic. it's only debt-based crowdfunding, and there are very, very tight restrictions on what happens. But it's still fundamental about the addressable market. The challenge is not raising money. The challenge is finding really good projects and designing the products. And lastly, pension freedoms. This is my own particular bugbear, but Citigroup originally said they thought 4.8 billion would move this year, 4.8 billion that would have gone into an annuity, which would then be looking for a home. And in fact, it was 1.8 billion in the first quarter. So there are goods, there are bads about that level of freedom at that particular time of life. It's a particularly scary point to imagine just how many people are having to decide for themselves where to put their money, and hence the rapid growth in robo-advisors and wealth wizards and sites that help you decide. But the indication I'm trying to give is there is a huge amount of money potentially on the move. A lot of people deciding for themselves where to put it, people who don't understand derivatives and contract for difference. I mean, I don't unless I've had 3 coffees. It is regulated, which makes us feel a bit safer about it. And we're really not happy with how things are currently. This is not a bubble of an equity crowd fund where things may get overvalued and it's all over. This is a fundamental opening up of the market for self-directed investors, which makes it very addressable indeed. I'm going to go at the speed of light. So the reason why we're focused on renewable energy at Trillion is because we think that we do have to change where our energy comes from. We think that energy prices are only going to keep going up in an environment where you only have 6 utilities that seem to be able to charge us exactly whatever they want. Apologies if you're in the room. It's going to take a long time to change that mix. We need more consistent planning policy, not the absolute about term we've had over the last 3 months in the absence of opposition. It's not in the business model of Centrica and Scottish Power and others. It's like a turkey voting for Christmas. It's not going to happen. But if we want people to want to move towards a lower cost, lower carbon and perhaps decentralised energy future, to make it a vote winner, we have to have as many people as possible profiting from it, rather than 6 huge companies. So the idea is there's a place you can put your money where you can make a steady return, which is asset-backed, first and foremost, where you can also be part of the future energy mix and hedge what's going across it. So what we're trying to do at Trillion is to get people to put a little bit of money into something, connect the demand and supply, think about where the energy is coming from, but not just because of the carbon or anything else, but because they're protecting their pension pot. You do not have to believe in climate change. You have to believe in 6% asset-backed returns and a loan-to-value of 65% and a debt service cover ratio of 1.3. This is relatively low risk investment. You can now use your pension, you can now use your ISA. And with a massive divestment movement in place, where there's now a shortage of places to put your money, not a shortage of people who want to move it, and the PRA and Mark Carney saying just last week, there is a real risk for pension companies if all of their money is sitting in assets where there may be some stranding of those assets, because in 10 years, 15 years' time, they will not be worth what they're worth today, because at that stage it'll be crystal clear how much of an issue there is with carbon.